Good morning. My name's Tony. I'm the lead pastor here at Gateway. I'm excited to start a brand new 4-week series this week. We are starting this series called Runaway. It's the reasons we stray from God. Now, this might surprise you. This series isn't focused on people that we know that are running so fast in the opposite direction of God. Their lives are totally godless, if you want to say that. This series really isn't much about that. What Pastor Brett and I did, we sat down and we decided let's find some characters in the Bible who had a relationship with God at one point, and for whatever reason, they just sort of lost their way. There was something that came up in that relationship, or something that happened, or something God didn't do, and it caused them to turn away from God. So I guess you could say runaway disciples, if you will. So today we're going to start with a character that's popular with all of us, and I'll get to him in a moment. But first I want to say this. I believe that we as humans, as people, there's something in us, we like to follow something, but just not too close. Let me give you an example of that. Extreme weather events. I've never been able to understand storm chasers. Crazy people. We used to have a couple in our church. They've moved away and they don't do it, but they would go out, and I knew when I'd hear the tornado sirens, I knew what they were doing. They're getting in their cars. Man, they would deck their cars out, and they would go and they would chase tornadoes. Are you crazy? Are you out of your mind? But see, there was something in them. They wanted to be close to that. They wanted to get as close as they could. And hurricanes, have you ever watched the news and those guys are standing out there and the wind's blowing and things are blowing around and they just got to get the news shot, right? And it's like, you're crazy. Get inside, get up high, get out of the hurricane. But we like to be close to that until we get right to the point where we sense danger, or we sense that this may not go exactly as I hoped. And what do? They turn in their car and they turn around and they go the other way. Or how about wildlife encounters? So I went fly fishing down into the Smokies a few weeks ago. My wife let me go by myself because when I go with her, I feel guilty about going all day fly fishing, and she's by herself. We're empty nesters now. Our 3 daughters are all grown. So she let me go down by myself. And I spent the days up in the mountains trying to find, streams and stuff to fly fish. I was going home one evening, and I came up to about 5 or 6 cars, and we were just stopped. We weren't moving. We weren't going anywhere. We sat there probably for 2 minutes, and that's a long time sitting in a car, right? It really challenged my love for others. And I'm sitting there, and cars are going by us, but we're not moving. And you can't go around because it's in the mountains of the Smokies. And the turns, about the time I'd pull out to go around 5 or 6 cars, somebody would come around the corner and get me, right? So I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden it dawned on me as I saw the hands pointing out the window. These people stopped in the middle of the road, and there were literally like 10 cars behind me, 20 cars. And they didn't care because there was a bear right on the side of the road, just up into the hills. Now, I like bears. Not really. I will never forget when I was hiking in Colorado once in the mountains. Around this corner comes this woman and her fiance and their young kids, and they're running as fast as they can toward me. And I'm thinking, what in the world? Avalanche, something going on? They had walked around the corner, and there was a big black bear sitting right in the middle of right there. And she ran as fast as she could, and I'm pretty sure she was thinking, I just need to outrun him. And so she ran, and well, that's a long story, but the bear was, trust me, he was more afraid of them than they were of him. But some people like to get so close that they can feel like they can see what's happening and see what's going on, but nobody got out of their cars and walked up to the bears. Or what I call dangerous beauty. A couple years ago, we went to the Grand Canyon. We were at the Grand Canyon with my folks and my wife, and there was a tour, and we stopped at this spot where you get out and you walk out onto this huge thing. It was a really big, rock finger. There were no fences on the sides of this cliff. People could just walk right up to the edge of the cliff. And then I found out that it's 4,000 feet down. It's a mile down. And I'm thinking to myself, these people are nuts. I had anxiety. I loved it. You know, everything in me wanted to go over to the edge and just look down, right? And to feel that and see that beauty, but I didn't. As a matter of fact, I stayed so far away that I saw families running over there and little kids jumping on rocks all the way around. And I had so much anxiety about that. I said to my wife, we got to go. I can't be here anymore. People like to be close to the danger, but not too close. They like to follow, but when things get a little dicey, they turn away. It's because human nature is to run from the dangerous. We're sort of trained that way. When something is dangerous, we are taught to not go toward it, but away from it. When we sense fear or we sense that something might actually harm us, we run from that. We don't go into that. We're taught to run from those things. It's just not natural for us to go toward danger. As a matter of fact, this is a first responder slogan that they're proud of, that when others run away, we run toward. And that doesn't come natural to them. That simply comes through training and somehow forgetting their own fears and getting the courage to go to help somebody in danger. But for most of us, it's natural for us to walk away from danger, not toward it. We even go as far as making excuses when we're afraid. How many of you have social anxiety? Don't raise your hand. Okay, you can raise your hand. I guess we all know each other here. We love one another. How many of you just have social anxiety, right? We can make excuses like we don't go to parties, we don't go to gatherings, we don't join life groups at church because whatever, it's just I don't like to be in a group, or I don't go to church because the group scares me. We don't do this. Anywhere there's lots of people, we avoid it. It's not that we don't like people. We like being around people, but the anxiety, and so we make an excuse. I'm not going. I don't want to be there. I'm just going to stay home. A lot of that's because of some anxiety. Public speaking. I've been shocked at some people who have a really good gift, a gift to speak publicly, but they'll never do it because of a fear. They have a fear, and some people have a lot to say. Some of it not so good, but they have a lot to say. And they just won't say it because they have this anxiety, right? Going to the doctor. My father of mine, we were joking the other day that, he needs to go get checked out about something. And Mom made the comment, oh, he doesn't like doctors, right? We make excuses for that. We all do, right? Trust me, he'll be going to the doctor. If you know anything about my mother, he will be going to the doctor. But we make excuses to avoid things and run from things because we're afraid. And to take it just a little bit deeper into our life, we do this in relationships. How many of you have ever known somebody, and don't look at the person next to you, who dated someone for like years and years and years and could just never pull the trigger? Am I getting too close? Okay, I'll back away a little bit. The guy just wouldn't prop the question, right? And it could just simply be he's afraid of that commitment. We do this in our relationships. Listen, we refuse to engage with others because of a fear that I might be rejected. They may say no. They may judge me. They may have all kinds of ideas or say things about me. And so we avoid getting too close to people. Most of us enter into a relationship early on based off of what we can get out of the relationship. But eventually, listen, every relationship is going in one or the other directions. You're either growing towards somebody or you're growing away from them. And the fear and anxiety sometimes that we have in our relationships cause us to get to a point where in order to get closer and more intimate with somebody means I have to sort of let something go or sacrifice or give something up or give something so that the relationship can get closer. And so many of us get to that point and we just stall and we go the other direction. and we begin to grow apart. I've seen this in so many marriages. It's not that the people don't love each other. It's not that they can't live together. They just have for so many years avoided taking those steps toward one another that now they've gotten so far apart from each other, the marriage is in danger. This is just, you don't even have to be a Christian or a believer in God to know that this is true. Relationships. So many have fear and anxiety when it comes to relationships because we fear rejection, we fear judgment, we fear the unknown, fear of what I might have to give up in order to step closer to that person in the relationship. Our character today had this problem. The Apostle Peter. Peter was a disciple of Jesus. Peter wasn't just a disciple. He was one of the top 3. He was an executive of the 12, if you will. So Jesus had lots of followers. Most people don't realize this, but Jesus had hundreds of disciples, and they followed him. But he had 12 that were his inner circle. And then within that inner circle, he had 3. And we read about these 3 because they were the 3 that got to go up on the mountain with Jesus. He called the 3 out, and they went up on the mountain where Jesus was transfigured, and they heard God's voice, and Jesus glowed like the sun. And they got to experience all that because they were in the top 3 of the 12. Peter was one of these guys. You might say Peter was close to Jesus. He had a close relationship. Peter, in our Gospels, in all 4 Gospels, was always the one who would publicly speak out about Jesus or an issue. He would confess his loyalty to Jesus whenever he got the chance. Around the fire at Caesarea Philippi, toward the end of Jesus' ministry, Jesus asked them all the question, "Who do you say that I am?" And it was Peter who spoke up and said, "You're the Messiah, the Son of God, the Christ who's come to save the world." Nobody else said that. Peter said that. It was Peter who confessed he would never leave Jesus. When Jesus said, "That's great, Peter, but I'm going to Jerusalem. They're going to arrest me. They're going to crucify me." And Peter's like, "No, I'll never let that happen. I'll fight to the death." He said, "I'll never let you down. I'll never let you go. I'll never turn my back on you." This guy was close to Jesus. He loved Jesus. It was in the garden that night before Jesus was arrested. It was Peter, when the guard showed up, who drew the sword and began to swing the sword and took off a guard's ear. It was Peter who stood up to fight for Jesus, to rally the troops, right, if you will. Peter wanted to be close to Jesus. He wanted to be so close that he would even fight to keep him free. Physically fight. And there's no doubts to the readers of the Gospels that Peter wanted to be a follower of Jesus. Peter cared about Jesus. Peter put all of his hope, all of his future, he walked away from everything to follow this man named Jesus. At least what he believed Jesus was and who he was and what he was about to do. Until something happened. Something happened that asked Peter to go a little bit further in his relationship with Jesus. It challenged his commitment, if you will, to Jesus. And this is where we pick up in our text. A little background. It's now been 3 years, and Jesus has had this mind-blowing ministry. These disciples have seen miracle after miracle. They saw a dead man come alive. They saw a few fish and pieces of bread turn into enough to feed 5,000 people. They saw amazing things. But it's coming to an end. The disciples are excited, though, because they know they're going to Jerusalem. They know they're on their way for the last time, and they honestly, in their hearts, they truly believe in their hearts and in their minds that this is it. We're going into the city. He's going to establish his kingdom. He's going to establish God's kingdom on earth. It's all going to be over. We're no longer going to be nobodies. We're no longer going to be poor and insignificant and weak. Jesus is going into the city and he's going to establish himself as king. The triumphant entry. When Jesus entered that city and the people are shouting, Hosanna, and they're throwing palm branches down, it just reinforced Peter's expectation of what was about to happen. This is it, guys. They even started fighting over who's going to be on the right and who's going to be on the left of the king. Important seats. No longer were they to just be a ragtag group of guys running around the countryside with no power and influence. But the story takes a huge turn from the day Jesus enters into the city to the moment that he gets arrested. Guards and soldiers show up. They bind Jesus. Judas actually leads them to him in betrayal. They bind him, they arrest him, and they carry him off. And this is where we pick up. John 18, verse 15. Simon Peter followed Jesus. Remember, he's a follower. As did another of the disciples. We're not sure who that is, but more than likely it's John. John, this is the Gospel of John. John liked to refer to himself sometimes in his Gospel as the other disciple. He wouldn't say himself by name. He wouldn't say, as I did. He's referred to himself as the other disciple. So we think it's John. The other disciple was acquainted with the high priest. So he was allowed to enter the high priest's courtyard with Jesus. Peter had to stay outside the gate. Then the disciple who knew the high priest spoke to the woman watching at the gate, and she let Peter in. Now, it's very, very hard for me at this point to get into the mind of into Peter's mind and what's going on in there. What's going on, Peter? What are you thinking right now? Obviously, you're scared. Obviously, you're frightened. Obviously, you are associated with this man who was just arrested, who wants to be king, which is a crime. Are you going to be arrested with him? I mean, we don't really know what's going on. What we do know is that as Jesus was taken away, Peter followed closely. As the tornado was happening, Peter is chasing it. John 18:17. The woman asked Peter, "You're not one of that man's disciples, are you?" No, he said, "I am not." Because it was cold, the household servants and the guards had made a charcoal fire. They stood around it, warming themselves. Peter stood with them, warming himself. Now, I want you to picture this. It would have been a compound. This is a high priest's house in the temple. It would have been a compound. It would have had a gate, which you go through the gate into the atrium or the courtyard, and then you would go into the house. Peter had to stay on the outside of the gate. The disciple and the high priest went into the courtyard where Peter wasn't allowed, but then the disciple came back and the girl let Peter in. So he's standing around this fire with other servants, and they start to ask him. Now, this exchange is a little confusing to me. I don't understand why Peter is so scared. Isn't one of Jesus' disciples a friend of the high priest, and he just went into the high priest's house? Are you afraid, Peter, that he's going to let that guy off and not you? Or I don't understand what's going on here. It's hard to imagine what's going on in Peter's mind. Jesus and John went through the gate, and they're standing around the fire. And John spoke to this gatekeeper and said, "Let him in," so he's in. But Peter's scared. How do we know he's scared? Because he denied knowing Jesus. Now, the question from the girl, this is just a servant girl. Big, bold Peter who just cut somebody's ear off. This is a servant girl. Not that girls are weaker than boys. That's not what I'm saying. There's girls that are You'd be scared of them. I'm scared of all my daughters and my wife. But Peter, what are you afraid of? The servant girl simply says, aren't you one of his... Now, several things could be happening here. One, the servant girl simply might have just wanted to take Peter into the house to be a witness. This was how the law was supposed to have been happened. They bring somebody in who's been accused, and then they would bring anybody in that would come in that knew the person and witness on their behalf. Maybe she just wanted to know, are you one of his disciples? If you are, I'll take you in and I'll let you witness for Jesus. But Peter immediately just takes it as, I've been spotted. I've been called out. They know who I am. Her question isn't hostile, but John, who was the disciple, he was led into the house. So obviously, maybe it wasn't hostile. Perhaps Peter's just afraid because he just cut a guy's ear off, and he might be called out on that, right? Verse 25. Meanwhile, so I skip down to verse 25. Jesus goes into the house with John and the high priest, and they do all kinds of questioning. One guy slaps him, and Jesus is like, did I not speak the truth? Why did you hit me, right? So he goes in, and they're questioning Jesus. While that's happening, Peter's still outside around the fire with the others. And he says, meanwhile, as Peter was standing by the fire warming himself, they asked him again, you're not one of his disciples, are you? He denied it again, saying, no, I am not. Okay. To deny Jesus being Jesus' disciple the first time, it might have just been he was caught off guard. Have you ever been caught off guard and somebody says something to you and you're just like, you say something, you're like, wait, that's not true, and then you have to correct it? Maybe he was just caught off guard, but Peter doubles down. No, I told you once, I'm telling you again, I am not one of his disciples. Now, Peter had time to think about this. I don't know about you, but I'm a little surprised he's still around the fire. Don't forget, we want to be close to what's happening, but not too close. And it's getting a little too close for Peter. I probably would have left. Peter stays, and they keep questioning him. And this sort of gives us a glimpse into Peter's mindset. He wants to know what's happening with Jesus. It's kind of like you and I walking down the street with your best friend, and the police pull over, and they grab your best friend, and they put cuffs on him, put him in the car, and then they come for you. Hey, weren't you with him when he did this? And you're like, I don't even know the guy, right? That's kind of what it's like. Peter's afraid. Verse 26. But one of the household slaves of the high priest, a relative of the... No way. A relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off. Now he's in trouble. You cut my cousin's ear off, or my brother, or whatever. I'm adding to the scriptures. I probably shouldn't do that. But one of the household slaves of the high priest, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, asked him, didn't I see you out there in the olive grove with Jesus? As a matter of fact, you're the one that cut my cousin's ear off. Again, Peter denied it. He didn't double down. Now he's tripling down. Immediately, a rooster crowed. Now, we think that would have been a really distant rooster because it was illegal to have any kind of chickens in the compound of the temple. So it would have been a really long way, but he heard the rooster crow, and that brings us back to what Jesus had told Peter when Peter said, I'll never forsake you. I'll never leave you. I'm going with you all the way to the end, Jesus. Let's go to Jerusalem. And Jesus is like, Peter, before the rooster crows 3 times tomorrow, you're going to deny me 3 times. I'll never deny you. And he did. Peter triples down. This time, the relative pointed him out, and Peter was had. Now, why did John include this little bit about being the relative of the man that Peter cut his ear off? None of the other gospel writers include this little piece. That seems like kind of a big deal to me. Like, I would think they all would have included this in their story of what happened with Peter, because if I'm Peter and I'm standing there, it's a pretty big deal if the guy's ear that I cut off, his relative points me out. That's a big deal. I think it's this. I think for John included it because he wanted to remind us of Peter's strong stand for Jesus. John wants to show us the contrast between the disciple Peter, prepared to lay his life down for a cause, in contrast to the runaway Peter, who now is frightened for his life in a moment of fear and self-centeredness, and he turns and he runs away from God. And this is the moment. This is the moment of the message that you might be asking, great, but how in the world does that have anything to do with me? How does that relate to my story? And I believe Peter's story and my story intersect. Because like Peter, we all want to be close to what's happening. We all want to be close to the things that might possibly bring us joy or happiness or accomplishment or whatever. But the moment things get difficult in our life, we turn and we run. We want to follow Jesus. We even prayed a prayer maybe when you were a child. Or maybe recently you prayed a prayer because of fear that you might go to hell. And so you don't want to go to hell. And how many of you laid awake at night? And you know, your parents always prayed that prayer with you. If you should die before you awake, you know, why do we pray these crazy prayers to our kids? You know, and the kids go to sleep like, I'm going to die before I wake. You know, maybe that was you, and you prayed a prayer and you asked Jesus into your life, and you're thinking, I'm saved, I'm safe, I've got my ticket, I don't have to burn, you know, whatever. Maybe you got baptized. Maybe you go to church or you attend church. Maybe you give money or you give time or you give of yourself. And we follow Jesus because there are benefits included in following Jesus. We actually believe that there's grace and there's love and there's mercy and there's miracles and there's eternal life. I mean, come on, man, right? Eternal life. But just like Peter, he followed Jesus of the hope because of the hope that Jesus would be king, that Jesus would be established on earth as king. And what that meant for Peter was big. It was important. But few of us, like Peter, continue to follow Jesus where he goes because we become afraid of where he goes. Listen, following Jesus will cost you everything because Jesus gave everything. The contrast that John gives us is scene 1, Peter standing up, bold, cutting off people's ears, swinging swords, ready to fight for Jesus. Because if Jesus becomes king, it works out good for him, right? But scene 2, the king is arrested. The king is unwilling to call his angels. The king is unwilling to fight for his innocence. The king simply seems to be like a lamb to the slaughter, laying down his life. For who? For the very people who arrested him and hit him and beat him. He took upon himself our anger and our rage. He took upon himself our sin, our hatred for one another, our jealousy and our envy. He took it all upon his body and he laid it down and put it to death for us. Following Jesus, Peter found out that night, might cost me my life. It might cost me everything because Jesus paid it all. And instead of going all the way with Jesus to the cross that night, Peter turned away. He left. He walked out defeated. Some gospels say he wept because his heart was crushed and broken, that he didn't have it in himself to stand with Jesus through it all. The gospel doesn't call us, listen, the gospel doesn't call us to power. It doesn't call us to influence. It doesn't call us to wealth and fame, political power. Listen to me. If you think God cares about our political system, come on, man. It's all corrupt. Right, left, in between, up, down, whichever way you want to look at it. Because Jesus showed us the way. He showed us the way by laying down his life willingly for those who hate him, for his enemies. You want to change the world, it's not going to be through politics. It's going to be through loving one another like he loved you. The gospel doesn't call us to power and influence and wealth and fame. The gospel calls us to martyrdom. It asks us to lay down our lives for one another, for his sake. It calls us to be our own, to carry our own cross and be willing to take it up and follow him wherever he will go. Even when it might not seem beneficial to me, even when it seems like it might be actually bad for me, but if it's good for you, I lay down my life for you. Our King goes to a cross willingly, and then he turns to us and he says, listen, this is what love requires of you. And Peter didn't want to hear it. He didn't want to buy it. He didn't want to sell out quite like, it was just a little too close for comfort for him. Listen, real life change happens when you lay your life down, not fight for it. We have, Peter wasn't ready for that kind of a relationship with Jesus. And so he turned away. We have this, but here's the thing, we have an empty tomb. We're on this side of the resurrection. Peter didn't have that. We have the privilege of seeing Jesus die and come out of the grave. Peter didn't have that. And Jesus showed Peter a lot of grace and forgave him and restored him and brought him back into the discipleship fold. But we are on this side of the resurrection. We are on this side. We know what is on the other side of us laying down our life for one another. Even when it leads us to situations that bring fear and anxiety, we know that God brings glory to those who die to themselves. The best news is that Jesus overcame the grave. The good news is Peter was restored. Jesus is full of grace and mercy. Jesus even asks Peter later in the gospel, Peter, do you love me? Yes. Peter, do you love me? Yes. Peter, do you love me? Yes. How many times was that? How many times did Peter deny Jesus? Jesus wanted Peter to know, Peter, I know every denial, and I forgive you for all of it. Do you love me? So what's at stake for us? Why is this important? Why, how does this affect my life? It's this. What is at stake is the good life in the kingdom. Now, maybe some would get up here and preach hellfire and brimstone and you're going to hell if you don't. I'm not going to do that because I don't think it's about the end of life. We often equate coming to Jesus with getting that ticket and getting that way out and all. But I think Jesus talked more about transforming us now so we can live now and not have to wait until the end of time or the end of my life or whatever. I think what's at stake here is if we don't follow Jesus to our cross, to his cross, we will miss out on the good life of the kingdom now. It isn't about going to heaven or hell or being saved or not saved. those are important questions, but it's really more about your life now. And this message is about the here and now. Jesus taught us that if you want to find your life, you have to lose it. He actually told a parable. He said, unless a seed falls to the ground and succumbs to the earth and dies, it'll never grow up and produce fruit. It'll never come to life and produce that fruit, that good life of the kingdom fruit, that love between people, that joy and that happiness that is not tied to circumstances, that knowing God in my heart so that I can have a relationship with Him and I can have a relationship. This is the good life of the kingdom. It's not a perfect life, but it's definitely a life of hope and faith and different than the rest of the world's living. And Jesus is saying, unless you die, you'll never achieve that. These are metaphors for life. We think fighting for life enables us to keep life, but Jesus is actually saying the more you fight for your life, the more you'll lose it. It'll slip through your fingers. So what do? I'm going to ask you this morning to settle a question in your heart. Am I all in? Those of you that have decided to follow Jesus, those of you that have said yes to Jesus, are you all in? Are you willing to follow Him at all costs? Are you willing to understand and know that the cost of discipleship will cost you your life and everything? Standing there this morning, here this morning, you can take all your fear and all of your uncertainty of the future, like Peter, and say to Jesus, I'm with Him. Say to others, I'm with Him. Whatever He says is true. Whatever He does is right. Wherever He goes, I'll go. And so today I'm asking all of us to take a stand. To say yes, not against our enemies, but against our fears. Those things in our life that cause us to turn away. Worship leaders are going to come and close us out with a song. Would you take a stand this morning with Jesus? In your heart, would you just simply say, Jesus, I don't know the future. I don't know what's ahead. I've let you down so many times. Peter's a great example of how Jesus brings us back. If you've never said that in your life, if you've never made that decision to follow Jesus, listen, Christianity isn't about religion, it's about following a person and his way of life. I wish we'd lose the term Christianity and go back to the people of the way. Christianity carries all kinds of bad things today, but Jesus had a way of living that He calls us to that brings life and joy. I want to be a person of the way, but you will get in the way until you die to yourself. Are you all in this morning? Take a stand.